use is the use for food. The diversity and locality of cultivars and genetic resources is a way to actually build resilience, adaptability, and reduce vulnerability by maintaining diverse and adaptive plants that can cope with climate and environmental crises. And the rich agrobiodiversity tradition locally may store traits that will prove advantageous in changing environmental conditions. And one of the ways that that WWF, certainly Indonesia, is moving towards helping to preserve and helping to encourage some of this diversity is to try to make sure that these varieties are recognized and that origin and names are maintained as part of a fair food sovereignty program. And this particular example is for a rice variety that's called Adan, and it's from the highlands of Borneo and it's being marketed. It's I can testify to the fact that it's the best rice I ever ate, and it's now being marketed by projects that are done through WWF Indonesia. The area that this rice is coming from is a very, very remote area, and actually getting the rice out in any quantities is very, very difficult, even though it is produced actually often in large surplus amounts. So finally, in this scenario, WWF Indonesia plans to engage in more field action and advocacy in support of agrobiodiversity and recognition of related traditional knowledge. And it's going to do this by focusing on small farms as a significant share of agricultural production. Again, reiterating some of what Terry, Robert, and others have said of just how significant local production or local use is even on a global level. It's going to promote environment-friendly methods and investments, for instance, recycling farm water, multi-species, maintaining agrobiodiversity, and so forth in these areas by documenting and protecting biocultural knowledge system related to plants and crops, by helping manage competing claims over land use to avoid land grabbing for biofuels and cattle feed in some of these areas where there are large extensions of land still that may catch the eye of investors who might want to invest in these profitable crops, in promoting good governance of natural capital, and in landscapes and regions where traditional management practices, customary land use, local wisdom, and rich biodiversity are linked in strong and adaptive systems. All of these need to be maintained so that they can serve as a basis for sustainable and resilient green economies. So I hope that for anyone who would like that, we can certainly make this paper available. And if there are any very specific questions, I may or may not be able to answer them to some extent. But on behalf of, I actually know something about Adan rice and others, so I don't know if anyone would like to pose a question or two.
Yes, I have a question regarding the local market. How are they enabled or re-enabled in this case? What instruments have been used in terms of policy and management to re-enable these local markets so the varieties can?
In the case, I know in the case of this, of Adan rice, for example, what they find very important is to make sure that they have these sort of territory. It's like the terroir designations that are used in sort of European commodities that you may know about. I know one of how you are enabled to actually participate in this market to buy these products. I think this is something that's being worked out right now. There are real difficulties with these products coming out of rather remote areas. There are also some issues, and this is something that you mentioned in terms of rights to names and rights to territories and labeling by territory, since adjacent areas are also claiming these same products as they come onto the markets. But this is something that, since an issue I think that they're facing. It's an issue that I think there is no simple answer to. Right now, I know that much of their marketing is being done, for instance, in sort of fairs, particular sort of diversity of local product fairs and so forth. And some of that is made available in Indonesia, but they do hope to move to a larger market. And I'd be happy to put you in touch with Christina Egghenter if you'd like to know any more specifics about this.
One very last quick question in this stress.
And then that's a question to all of the speakers. So assuming that you cannot change food habits or our thirst for meat and palm oil, etc., then but we identify the scaling of smallholder agriculture and forest-derived income as within an integrated landscape approach as being key to food security and conservation. How may such a scale of food security coming from nature and smallholder agriculture, how may that take place without that being at the detriment of existing agricultural production? And where does maybe is that a degraded land, is that a key area where basically how can we attain?
Well, I would say that this is part of our last bit on the roadmap, so maybe we can leave it to the next session where we discuss exactly this topic, how we can do it, because most of the things we've been talking is kind of invisible, as Christine defined. The crop relatives were not visible, this traditional forest management is not visible, what farmers, smallholders do in managing their production system is also quite not well acknowledged, as Terry mentioned. So how to make it more visible and how to do it in ways that is not detrimental is probably what will be discussed next. So to conclude the presentation, I'd ask Robert to make the presentation on behalf of ICRAF, the World Agroforestry Center, and then we'll start our next session.
Sorry again, sorry you will not be spared today. I'm trying to talk with my work that has been done for a few years with colleagues from ICRAF in the Muara Bungo area in Sumatra about the issue of the agroforest in this Jambi area. I go fast. We have seen the issue. To summarize into Indonesia, there is an increasing population. Indonesia is probably the fourth largest country in the world. It's the largest rice consumer in the world, and food production is a big issue, and unfortunately rice production doesn't necessarily follow population, and Indonesia is a net importer of rice. The presentation is talking about rubber agroforest, and there are different types of rubber agroforest. I mean, complex, simple one, and there is a rubber monoculture. And this is very similar to what Christine presented for acai, in fact, except that rubber is not an indigenous species in Indonesia. It comes from the Amazon. But it's something that has taken a huge importance, and especially in this province, which is the Muara Bungo province. We have the small city of Muara Bungo in Sumatra, in the Jambi province. What has happened in this area is that in 1973 you had 75% of forest, something like 10% of rubber agroforest and a little bit of the rest, and then in 2008 you have 15% of forest left. You have less agroforest, rubber agroforest, an increase in monoculture rubber, and a significant increase in oil palm, and a little bit of the rest as well. So the sort of the worrying trend is that you see that through the year, most of the area and the rubber agroforest was fairly consistent, so that you had this area, and then it's starting to decrease significantly in 2008. And this has some definitive importance, because this complex rubber agroforest were the place where you had a lot of the biodiversity that was lost in the forest converted into oil palm that was kept. So it's important because biodiversity, wildlife, wild animal, and food was maintained in this rubber agroforest, and this rubber agroforest, they disappear. To plant oil palm or monoculture of rubber. So if you have a picture of 30-year-old rubber agroforest, 60-year-old looks very much like a natural forest, and a secondary forest of 25 years. In terms of species density and species richness, you see that the complex rubber agroforest and forest are somewhat similar with in terms of diversity. The most shrub young, the younger they are, the less species or the less diversity you have. But which is important is to note the importance, the number of sapling in terms of regeneration and undergrowth and understory, because understory is where a lot of the food value is in this forest. This forest, there are many trees in this agroforest that are edible parts. I will not go through, but for those who know, the durian is a famous one. Parkia is also a famous one. Artocarpus, the breadfruit. So there are a lot of trees that bear fruits and that are now only left in this agroforest. And among the introduced species, I mean, sort of you have rubber and oil palm, of course, and then you have the same species, and that's the product what they are planted and they are at the same time. And this shows you the complexity of this agroforest compared to the monoculture. This one goes under shows what I said in the previous picture, that you have in the lower stratum, in the understory, the composition of species in the complex agroforest is very close to the natural forest. It contains a lot of species rich for food. So that's the challenge that faced in this region now, is that the complex rubber agroforest disappear because it's more economically interesting to have monoculture of rubber or oil palm. And at the same time that this complex rubber agroforest disappeared, the diversity that they were protecting, the food resources that they were protecting, that were lost in the forest that were disappeared already, they are disappearing also. So if the trend continues in Jambi, you will have only monoculture of oil palm, monoculture of rubber, and when the oil palm or the rubber price is going down, people are facing serious problem because they have no more rice field, there are no more food resources from the forest, and so they are fundamentally resulting in a sort of a stage of food shortage in a place that is only an agricultural place. So there is plentiful of rubber, plentiful of palm oil, but nothing to eat. So the idea is to try to provide added value to this rubber agroforest, to agroforestry system. Whatever they are, it could be Tangia, which is a sort of intensive. So that everything is not commented into a sort of a huge monoculture because of the, as Terry said, that if you have only 2 crops in your landscape, if there is a problem with the 2 crops, you have a big problem in terms of food security. And hoping not to have make not a fool of myself, but treasure to the presenter. This is if you have any questions.
Any question for this last presentation before we move into the... Yes.
If I may, not maybe to ask a question, but to make a comment, since I've worked also in these areas with these rubber agroforests, it's not just that it may be economically more important to do monoculture, but there's active discouragement for farmers to do this. So when high-yielding rubber comes, and of course every farmer wants to produce more rubber. If you have a rubber garden, they're not interested in low-yielding rubber. But every time they come, and there are programs to introduce these, it comes with rules that say you can't plant anything else. So there's many of these systems have been actively discouraged by both government and any other extension services, for example. So I actually think some of these things are sort of political resistance. You know, in order to continue to do something like that, you actually you have to resist every push that you get from many sectors telling you that this is the wrong thing to do.
Okay, so we have 15 minutes. We were asked by the organizers to conclude in time because at 1 p.m. there will be another meeting event on this room. So we have 15 minutes for the final discussion, which would be on a roadmap on how the issues that were discussed earlier can be actually actively encouraged and promoted. If I may just quickly summarize, I think that there were two elements that came out and that are important. One is the issue of biodiversity, which came up in basically all the presentations, and the importance of biodiversity for food security in general. It's clearly relevant for the crop relative, for the way assay is managed, for global food security, as was presented by Terry, the issue of bushmeat that was presented before, and how WWF and ICRA are promoting agrobiodiversity in complex agroforest systems. And the other thing is local knowledge, which is probably closely interrelated. I mean, it seems that the more local knowledge is used, the more the systems are biodiverse. And therefore this local knowledge is, if you want to conserve biodiversity for food security, it's probably important also to conserve in parallel and to make better use and to value more traditional knowledge. Just as an example from the crop relative bit, I mentioned that it's a very key, it's a global aspect, is fully discussed in the Convention of the CBD Commission on Genetic Resources of Food Agriculture of FAO also has a big component on crop relatives. IUCN has a specialist group on crop relatives, so it is an important thing. And in Europe there is this big program also looking at crop relatives, and when they come to conservation issues they realize that the best way to conserve is just making agreements with farmers that are doing traditional agriculture. For example, in the UK, big reservoirs of genetic diversity of crop relatives are found in farmers' edge, and they are found only in those edge of farmers doing a bit more traditional agriculture. So the best way to conserve is just asking farmers to keep doing traditional agriculture, because this is where the diversity is. So this is just to give an example. So I think that probably the best way is try to find a roadmap that invests on this traditional knowledge. And I think this section is really supposed to be open to the audience to give ideas. Questions was raised early, how we can do it without disrupting other systems. And I think this is really the key questions. Yes, please.
Yeah, I would say that more than how to do it without disrupting other systems, because I think there is large scope for a lot of people to intervene in this moment, so we can have solutions to food insecurities around the world. So probably some intensive agriculture is necessary to feed the world at this moment. But what I'm more interested in following up, I mean, what you said is these are valuable local experience, some concrete case studies in which we can learn quite a lot. But the problem of scaling up, the problem of enlarging our mutual capacity to learn from each other, and especially to link it, with concrete political strategies to enable markers, to enable circuits of distribution, and to enable mutual research or hybrid research, which takes into account the scientific and traditional knowledge together to give concrete solutions to food insecurity.
If I may, I'm not going to answer certainly all of your questions, and I'll maybe not answer any of them, but also to refer to the scaling up. If I may first of all say, not everything needs to be scaled up. You know, I think that's one of our issues, is that if everything always has to be in one model, then these particular systems have no place. I think the acai example, and it is an example, but it's an enormous example. It's a huge example, and I think it does show that some of these systems are capable of responding to new incentives, to new opportunities, as well as to new problems, without necessarily destroying everything, and doing that in resisting both tremendous pushes towards simplification, which is the general idea of how agriculture is supposed to produce more food, or big changes in scale. A lot of this still is produced by smallholders rather than the sort of more efficient way of having enormous landholders coming in. So all of this is done with sort of resistance. So if we have to generalize or we have to scale up, we can scale up certain things and not in other ways. So we understand what are some of the